Hello, Internet. Welcome to another episode of Bob's Woodshop. If this is your first time here, thanks for tuning in. And for viewers that have seen me before, thanks for coming back. Today's project is this attractive three-legged stool. This is a project that's combining my veneering hobby along with my turning hobby. So first things first, I needed to cut some different colors and different widths of veneers. And I'm using my veneer saw here. And I'm just using different pieces of plastic and wood in order to get these straight cuts. Here I'm using a piece of aluminum, and that's for a future project that I plan to do in the next week or so. I'm going to attempt to make my own jack plane. So I'm using the white piece on the right just for a straight edge. I used another piece of 3/4 inch plastic as a template for another piece, and here I'm doing the same thing. I needed to make 4 different patterns, and I needed 6 different colors for this. Here I'm using a small piece of plywood for the width of the purple. So I used 6 different colors and several widths, 3/8, 1/2 inch, and 3/4, and that's what it's looking like. What I'm attempting to do here is to make 4 separate triangles in order to make the square that goes on the top. So once you have the colors and the widths that you want, I'm just cleaning up the edges on this aluminum block here, and then from there I've got to tape each one of these together. So this only really takes a few minutes. This veneering part of the project took about an hour to tape together. Here I've got my tape on my hand ready to place these pieces correctly and to apply the tape. You just got to get those pieces nice and tight against each other, good butt joints, and then tape them all together. So it's really a relatively simple process. When I first started getting into veneering several months ago, I was amazed, but I was also a little bit intimidated. But after I did it once or twice, it's actually very easy to do. So if you've never tried this before, I would highly suggest that you do give it a try. See if you can find somebody in your area that knows how to do marquetry or parquetry. So once it's all taped together, I'm using a guillotine in order to cut the miter joints. You can see I've got a 45-degree plastic square on the cutter there. So you just try to get this to be as perfect a cut as you possibly can, and you just have to make 4 of these. And here's what it looks like on top of the seat, and you can see it's not covering the entire seat. So I've got to go and get some additional veneer, and I chose some tiger maple, which I think is very striking. And of course I mitered those corners, and then I'm just rolling out the blue tape. The possibilities of designs are endless. You can get veneers in all different colors and woods, and it's really up to your imagination what the patterns look like. And this really adds a lot to any project that you can make. So now that that's done, I have to drill a hole in this seat. This is the bottom of the seat, and this is in preparation of putting in a worm screw so that I could hold it into a chuck. And so here I'm just using a wrench in order to get the worm screw into the seat. And quite honestly, I really don't use a worm screw on any other project except this one. And the reason I'm using this is so I don't have a lot of holes in the bottom of the seat there. So I inserted the worm screw into the scroll chuck, and now I have to make a facing cut. I've got to make sure this is nice and flat. So it takes a few minutes to get it flat. You'll notice I'm just leaning backwards also in order to try to make this as flat as possible. And once I get this nice and flat, I'm going to have to make an indent inside of this. So this is just traditional straight turning. I would say this is probably like a 9th grade project. I think this is a really good beginner's project because it has both bowl orientation and spindle orientation. So here I gotta make sure it's nice and round. You'll notice I'm moving my body. I'm just shifting my weight. I'm using my hand, my left hand there as a pivot point. And you get a much more controlled cut when you turn this way. So this is, again, very simple to do. If you haven't turned before, try to find a local wood turning club in your area. There is the American Association of Wood Turners national organization, actually international organization, and you probably live close by to a turner. And you can go to the AAW website and find a chapter near you. Highly recommend, if you've never turned before, to let someone teach you how to do it, not only on how to do it, but things not to do, which is really important. So here I'm using a bowl gouge, and I'm just rounding the corners on the top and the bottom. So you can make this profile a lot of different shapes, but because I have a veneer inlay that I want to do, I'm just rounding the corners. Some of the other stools that I've made like this, I have a different profile. But on this, I want the main feature to be the veneer on the top. So I'm doing a little bit of sanding. And just trying to get the outside edge nice and smooth. The back also. Here I'm going after that little nubbin in the middle. That's where the tailstock was holding the seat onto the headstock. So here's where I'm beginning to put an indent for the veneer to lay in to the seat. So I'm just using a parting tool and just making the very first indent. Veneer is usually 1/32 of an inch thick. So I have to make an indent in order to lay the veneer into this part of the seat. And here I'm using a square scraper. And again, I'm just eyeballing about 1/32 of an inch thick. I'm doing this so the veneer just doesn't lay on top of the seat. I want it to be inset so you really can't see the edge of the veneer. So I was using the square scraper to get the bulk of it, but there's some ridges in there, and I really don't like the way the ridges are looking. So in order to smooth out those ridges, I'm going to use my 1.5 inch wide skew chisel, and I'm using this as a negative rake scraper in order to try to make a very nice, even, flat surface there. So again, I'm just taking my time as usual. I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible. And just cleaning this up just so that I've got that nice indent for the veneer to lay into. So once I'm satisfied with that, it's on to making the legs. And I started out with 8/4 poplar for this project. And I got this at my local lumber yard. And I'm just using the table saw here. Notice I'm using a push stick there because I really don't want to get cut on my table saw. So anytime you're using thin pieces of wood like this, it's a good idea to use a push stick. So I ended up making 4 legs, and one just was for demonstration purposes and for future projects. And I'm preparing to put this on the lathe as a spindle turning. So you got to find the center on each end. Then I usually put a little hole in each one with an awl, and then I can chuck it up. I'm using a stub center here, and I'm using a rotation speed of around 1800. That's a nice feature of the Nova Galaxy. It has a automatic brake on it, so when you turn it off, it slows it down very quickly. Here I'm using a 2 inch wide roughing gouge. It's called a spindle roughing gouge. And again, you'll notice I'm moving my body. I'm not moving my hands. My arms are really locked into my body. And I do this so that you get a very smooth cut. So you could keep your body standing still and move your hands, but you're not going to get as nice a cut. So the technique I'm using is a good pro tip for you. So all I'm really trying to do here is just to get the thing round. And I ran that over the top just to find out if it was round without turning it off. If you hear a knocking sound, you know you're not round. Here I'm starting to lay out the dimensions towards the bottom of the screen there. That's going to be a 1 1/4 inch long tenon by 1 inch wide. So here I'm using the caliper in order to get to 1.5 inches diameter at the bottom. This is going to be the part that's sitting on the floor. If you get a new set of calipers, make sure that they're not sharp. You got to make sure that they're rounded off. That way they won't grab into the wood and be flown out at you. Here I'm using a parting tool in order to get down to a 1 inch diameter. You'll notice when I'm using my parting tool, I choke up on it and I have my finger close to the cutting edge. And I find this helps for accuracy. So here I'm trying to cut a 1 inch diameter tenon in order to fit into the hole at the bottom of the seat. And typically what I'll do, if it's supposed to be 1 inch, I'll make it maybe 1 1/16 inches and then sneak up on it with some sandpaper to get exactly that 1 inch diameter that I'm looking for. There's a little shoulder on top of the leg here that's right at the bottom of the seat, and that's at 1 1/8 inch. There are specifications later on in the video that you'll see if you want to duplicate this project. Here I'm using a D-way beading tool, and this makes quick work of making the 4 beads at the bottom of the leg. You can do this with a spindle gouge, but I think it's much easier with beads like this that are very close together to use a beading tool. So there's probably an infinite variety of shapes that you can make for the legs, and you can put 1 bead, 2 beads, 3 beads, whatever you want, whatever your imagination can come up with. If you look on Pinterest, there's numerous 3-legged stool designs, and you can get ideas there also. Here I'm using a center ruler in order to come up with the center of the large bead in the middle. The large bead is 6 1/4 inch long. And here I'm using a 1 inch spindle roughing gouge in order to make this long bead. It almost looks like a taper, but it is rounded, so I would call this a long bead. So again, just taking your time, and I am taking my time, even though this leg took 7 minutes. I was taking my time doing it. As you can see, I'm moving pretty slowly here. And I'm just trying to make a nice curve with very few marks on it, so I can reduce the amount of sanding that I have to do. So you might notice the chips are flying off to the camera, and that's because I have a fan behind me to blow the chips and the sawdust away. And here I'm getting down to the final dimension, and again just going slowly, rubbing the bevel. Here I have to make another indent with my parting tool in order to come up with 1 1/4 inch diameter at the top of the 4th bead. And then from there I can make the other side of the bead, which you'll see here in a second. So again, using the spindle roughing gouge and turning downhill, trying not to mess with that top bead there. And now I'm cutting uphill, which you're really not supposed to do when you're turning, but I was trying to protect that top bead and not make a mistake. So this is a very slight taper that I have to do here. So this just worked out just fine. So again, just trying to make this as smooth as possible and accurate as possible. Again, moving my body versus my hands. And there's a slight taper at the foot of the leg. So just again using the spindle roughing gouge. So I started with 120 sandpaper, went to 180, and finished up with 240. Again, you can see the sawdust blowing because I have the fan behind me. It's still kind of warm here in New Jersey. And here I'm checking the profile of the 1-inch tenon at the top of the leg. And again, I'm using sandpaper just to sneak up on that to get that as close to 1 inch as possible. This profile gauge is really nice. You could also use a 1-inch wrench or whatever size wrench that you want. So here's leg number 1. And here's leg number 2. And leg number 3. So now that the legs are done, I've got to locate the positions of the 3 holes. And I'm using a circular protractor. And I'm just making sure the center of the protractor is at the center of the hole in the bottom of the seat. And I'm marking it 0, 120, and 240. There's various ways to do this, but I think this is the easiest way. And then I have to draw a line, again making sure that the edge of the ruler is right in the center of the hole. And again marking at the 0, 120, and 240 lines. I ended up extending these lines all the way across for drilling the holes, which you'll see in a little bit. But if you do make this project, go ahead and draw that line all the way across. The holes are located 1 3/4 inches from the edge. So I'm using a little combination square in order to make that cross hatch mark. Again, this just makes quick work of locating these holes. Next thing I got to do is make a holding fixture for the seat in order to put it on my drill press. I could mess around with trying to tilt the table 15 degrees, but I find it easier to do a holding fixture instead. So I want the legs to be splayed out at 15 degrees. On previous ones that I've done them at 12 degrees, and they looked okay, but I think they're going to look better at 15 degrees. So again, I just used a speed square there in order to come up with the 15-degree angle. I'm going to take that over to the bandsaw. So I don't have a taper fixture, so I'm just cutting this freehand. I'm just taking my time and getting that as accurate as I can. You'll see this assembly in a minute or so, so just hang in there with me as I make this. This assembly fixture took maybe 10 minutes to build. And then I can use that for any future projects that I make. Now I got to need to make another one because these are the sides of the fixture. So I'm just using the first one as a template. And I could cut this on the bandsaw, that straight edge. But I think it's better to just bring it over the table saw and cut that straight edge on the table saw. Again, these are thin pieces of wood, so whenever possible, I'm always using my push stick. So this is the base of the fixture, and I'm using a center finding rule. If you don't have one of these, I'd highly recommend getting one, because it makes finding the center of an object, a piece of wood, very easy to establish. And I just really want to draw a center line through this in order to help center the stool seat onto the fixture. That's important. So here I'm going to be attaching the sides to the base. And I'm using my little Grex pin nailer, which I use on almost all my projects. This thing is great. This is a 23 gauge pin nailer, and I love it. So I'm placing a few more pins just to make sure these sides are nice and secure. And now I'm going to do the top of the fixture. And I'm using my combination square in order to come up with a 45-degree angle. And you'll see in a minute why this is important. So I didn't want to just cut off those ends, so I'm using my ruler here in order to give it a little bit more depth. And again, using the combination square here and just in order to cut that to length. I did that on my chop box, and I'm bringing it back over to the bandsaw in order to cut this V-notch. Again, just going slowly, trying to make that line as straight as possible. Now that the notch is done, I've got to attach that to the fixture. And you can see why it's important to put the center lines on here. And I'm just placing it on with a couple 23 gauge pins. Doesn't need to be glued. And I'm just marking this fixture at 15 degrees. From there I got to take it over to the drill press, and I'm using a 1-inch diameter Forstner bit. So the depth of this hole is 1¼ inch deep, and you can see why I drew the lines all the way across, because I wanted to line up the lines with the center of the fixture there. So this makes quick work of drilling these holes at the right angle. And you can see how well the fixture works. Now that I have 6 lines on there, I got to make sure I'm drilling into the right spot, so you can see the crosshatch there. And at the bottom of the screen there, I'm lining up that line onto the line of the fixture. So drilling these 3 holes only took about a minute or so. Like I said, I find it much easier to make a fixture versus adjusting the angle on the drill press. You see I put a piece of blue tape on the Forstner bit in order to locate the length that I want to do. From there I set my Bosch glide saw at 15 degrees, and then I have to set up a stop block in order to make sure that I'm cutting the right length. The overall length of this leg is 10 3/4. You got to be very careful on this particular cut. So I'm holding it very tightly, and I'm doing 1, cut. Swapping out to the second leg. Again, making sure that it's tight against the stop block and the fence, holding it very tightly since it's round. And there's the second. And I'm locating it so the grain is all in the same direction. And boom, those 3 cuts are complete. Now I'm fitting it into the holes. That one's a little tight. That one's a little loose. And it's coming together very well now. So that shows that the 15-degree holes and the 15-degree cuts on the bottom of the legs were perfect. There's another stool that I made last year. I made that one in the lower left out of Spectre plywood. I used 4 different colors of Spectre plywood. You'll notice on the one in the foreground there, I put beads on the top of that. But obviously, since I'm doing veneering on this one, I had to make that indent. So in order to cut the circle on the veneer, I was thinking, how am I going to do that? Am I going to use my bandsaw, a pair of scissors, and then I remembered that I had a beam compass. And I took the pencil out of the one end and put an X-Acto knife in. So using the X-Acto knife worked very well. And at this point, I'm over at Craig's shop, because he's going to help me do the gluing up on this. So I traced around the circle to the same diameter that I put on the indent on the seat, and went around twice, and it came right out. So this is a good way to cut veneer at a curve. So now that the veneer is cut to size, Craig Newton, my buddy who's taught me veneering, is helping me with the gluing up process. This is a special glue called cold press glue. And you just got to have a nice consistent thickness all the way around. And once you're satisfied with the glue, then you just have to place the veneer on top of it. And I used a little marker there. And also took all the blue that you saw earlier off, and this is veneer tape. And so the side that had the blue on it is actually the glue side, and this brown veneer tape is going to be the side that you see. Again, you use a little wallpaper seam roller here in order to make that work, and then you put it into the vacuum bag. The mesh on the vacuum bag helps compress the veneer onto the substrate in an even, consistent manner, and highly recommended if you're going to be using a vacuum bag. Then you have this white and blue sealing assembly, and that makes the bag airtight. So the glue and the whole assembly sits in the bag for an hour, and that sets up very well. And then it's recommended to wait until the next day in order to do any additional work. So to glue it up, I used those weights, and in order to put the finish on, I decided to have a real big contrast to that tiger maple. So I painted it black. Put a couple coats. This is a flat black paint. And obviously I had to put this blue tape back on in order to protect the veneer. So this is back at my shop now. Here's a little bit of the view of the bottom of the stool. And I like using these little painting pyramids. Those things are great, great invention. And I still have to make a little medallion to hide that hole at the bottom of the stool. I have not yet, as of the recording of this video. After the paint dried, I let that dry for a day. Then I put a couple coats of lacquer over the entire stool project. So here's the final project, and I think it looks pretty good. This is a great project as a gift. It could be used as a milking stool. It could be used as a speaker stand, a little book stand, a variety of things. It's great for children. This is the 6th one I've made, and the people that have gotten these as gifts, I love them. Here's a couple of outside shots. And like Craig told me when he started teaching me veneering, it brings your projects to a whole new level. And I agree with him. Well, I hope you liked that project. Hopefully I inspired you to make one of your own. You can see it's a pretty simple item to do. And you don't have to do the veneering, although it adds a lot to it. You could just paint it in a variety of colors. So I haven't really decided what to do with this one yet, but somebody's going to really like it when they get it as a gift. Here's the dimensions. And you guys know the drill, especially people that are regular subscribers. Please like, comment, and if you have not yet subscribed, please do. And remember, always stay safe in your shop. Keep your safety glasses on. So until next time, I'll see you on another episode of Bob's Woodshop. Bye-bye.